Good afternoon, YouTube. Tire Metalhead Weatherman. Hopefully, you guys are doing well today on this Saturday. We're about at the end of January and starting to transition into February. So, we're going to go ahead and close out this January forecast. Take a look at the first bits of February here. We do have a little bit left to address in January. We do have a marginal risk for severe weather tomorrow. Not a major deal, but there is still a threat for all three hazard types and a small chance that this could uptrend. Not a high one. If something does really kind of scream out to me within the next 12 to 24 hours, I'll probably have a video up by morning. But as of right now, I don't really think I'm going to talk about this too much further beyond today. There is a tornado threat with this marginal risk stretching across a good portion of the Gulf of Mexico here. From the Florida Panhandle, we can include cities like Panama City involved in there. Of course, New Orleans, Baton Rouge are in there as well. Pasadena, College Station, numerous other cities along the coast and pretty far inland as well. Even the northern half of Louisiana is involved too. All the way up towards areas like Alexandria, we could watch you for a slight chance of a tornado tomorrow. Not a major threat, but it does exist. As they would say, it's always the one that you never see is the one that gets you, and I don't really want you to be in that situation. In other words, there is a damaging wind threat as well, very minute. If there was any chance of this uptrending, I think this would be the reason why, but even so, looks relatively unimpressive in that regard. Then of course there's a hail threat where the lap straits are a little bit steeper, more so towards Texas and Louisiana. No real surprises there. The temperatures are a bit warmer along this region here. But other than that, there's no real severe weather to talk about to end out the month in January. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at the temperatures because that's going to be some big talk over the next couple of days. So what we have here is we're looking at the euro, and we're going to take a look at the next 10 days here. This will lead us into the first few days of February. And we can actually expect it to be pretty daggone cool. And when we move forward, you can see those negative temperatures now starting to creep their way into the northern tiers of the Great Plains and actually starting to stretch into the Central Plains too. We're getting further and further south with those lower temperatures during the overnight hours each day. Start to see a little bit of a retreat, and just when you think that cold air might be done with us, right towards the end of this model run, we see this next blast start to come in, and it pushes a little bit further south. And this will be highlighted a little bit better once we get a look at some of the longer model runs here. But over the next 10 days, throughout a good portion of the country, we're going to be cooler than average. In fact, if you looked at the 6 to 10 day outlook in the last couple of days, a large portion of the country is going to be dealing with below average temperatures. Only area that's really looking like they're not going to be super cold is a small pocket over here along the south here. Partially, this will be due to the southeast ridge set up in a position to stave off some of that cold air. Even so, it's not like you're going to be above average for the most part. You're going to mainly be at about average, if anything. Maybe slightly below, but it's not high confidence that you're going to be 10 to 15 degrees below average here. Anywhere else, I'd say pretty much north of this line here, I would say so. And I just made a sounding trying to make that line, but what can you do? Just trying to make a good example. Upgrades are coming. Make our comparison here with the Canadian model. It's going to be a pretty similar deal. We'll actually set this one into a loop. And it's a pretty similar look. Slightly less aggressive than the Euro is, but nonetheless, we're still dealing with some pretty frigid air beginning to come in here in the early stages here. This goes out to about the same length as the Euro model. And I'm about to make another bad sounding. See if I can hold out here. Maybe I can negate it. But look how far those lows even get towards the southeast. This is mainly what's going to keep the temperatures below or slightly at average across that region. I can't even move the cursor, otherwise that sounding is going to pop up. It's pretty funny. But for the most part, gonna be cool to start out the month of February. But interesting things are ahead when we take a look at the GFS, which we're about to do right now. Once I get this fixed. All right, now that I got that fixed, we're gonna go ahead and take a look at the GFS here. So we'll set this into a loop. Again, at the beginning, it's going to be a pretty similar look. Slightly more aggressive on the cold than even the Euro is. We're getting some negative 20s in there, whereas we were getting negative teens more so with the last two. And this is going to stretch for a little bit longer span of time, it looks like. But eventually, this cold air does start to clear out, as you can see this movement off to the east here. Now, there is a warm sector that does start to develop around this region towards the southeast, so there could be a couple of areas to watch with severe weather. We'll highlight that further once we get into the vorticity maps and etc. But we, of course, have to watch more so towards the middle of February, I think, for increased activity. But again, look at how far that cold air really starts to advance. Like I said, it's a very small pocket around the lower 48 that's going to end up keeping at average or slightly above average temperatures. This air is really cold, so once you do get caught in it, just make sure you're bundled up, and it's going to last for a bit. So if you were foolish enough to put those winter boots away, I think you were too hasty. I'm just going to tell you right now. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. You were a bit foolish. Just going to say that now. Anyway, that's what we're dealing with on the GFS here. Last thing to really hammer this part home, so to speak, is to look at the 6 to 10 day temperature outlook. Yesterday we were looking more so towards the second. Now we've just recently updated to the third, so we're dealing with a slightly different look. By this point, the temperatures are going to be at about average. February is usually a pretty cold month, so this actually adds up pretty well. A slightly colder pattern to the west. We do have the northeast that's looking like they're going to be below average, but other than that, a lot of places are going to be sitting at an average or slightly above. These little small pockets right here are interesting. And then, of course, as I mentioned, that southeast ridge is going to be keeping South Georgia, southern Alabama, and most of Florida above average. And even this cold air does start to reach the southern parts of Texas, as we saw in the models here. So that's not surprising. We'll go to days 8 through 14, and we'll start to see a little bit more of a warming trend going on towards the west. This has the look of a classic negative PNA setup, which is a setup that lends to colder air being stationed to the west and warm air to the east. And this will most likely be causing a battleground over the southern plains throughout the middle of February, I would say. When we look at the temperatures, or precip, excuse me, it's going to be pretty calm here, and you'll get a good example as to why when we look at the vorticity maps, because vorticity maps are also a good way to kind of look at the jet stream, and I'll go into detail on that with just a minute. But the storm track is going to be mainly set up around the northwest and the northern tier of the U.S. here. There's a little bit of activity that seems to open up around the Gulf here. I do think this area could see a little bit more rain than what's being shown here over the next couple of days before we go dry. And then, of course, this region here, this is kind of an open spot where we could have our subtropical jet bringing in a little bit extra moisture here. But look what happens when we go to days 8 through 14. Look at that. Basically, everybody looks like they're going to be in line for some above average rainfall, with the exception of a few areas that look to have equal chance. Not a single area here looks like they're going to have below average precip through the looks of February 5th through February 11th. So that's pretty interesting. So basically what's going to be happening here is we're going to be dealing with a lull in the action here. It's a pretty welcome break for a lot of people. It's been a lot of crazy weather going on, but once that ends, we're going to be picking up right where we left off. And I'm going to show you something very unique as I start to switch over to the vorticity map here. So now I know what you're probably thinking. You're thinking, but Ty, we look at the vorticity map all the time. What's so special about this one? Here's where I hoped you were paying attention in the last forecast, in the last outlook video that I did for January, or the closeout of 2023. If you were paying attention on that one, we kind of saw a slightly identical look, although the timing was later in the month of January. Notice these isobars being straight. There was no ridges, there's no troughs at the high levels. This is usually going to indicate a little bit more fair weather. So ridge starts to develop as we get towards the end of the month right here, but not much in the way of severe weather. This is not a stout low pressure here. This is for the setup on the 29th, aka tomorrow. So see a little bit of activity here. Get towards the 30th. A little bit of shower, maybe a couple booms of thunder where the Cape is allotting, but for the most part, not much going on here. Most of the action here stays south of the border. May get a little bit of extra moisture rising up here, a little bit of rain, and this is towards the 2nd. This is our next system to watch, and this may cause a little bit of severe weather in this sector right here. That's my prediction for right now. Storm Prediction Center, of course, has not issued anything yet, given how far out this is, and I can't really blame them, but this does look moderately stout. We are looking at the euro, by the way. So we watch this go forward here, and eventually, as this moves out, we're back in a similar kind of short wave pattern here. Not much upper level forcing, not a whole lot of energy around right now. This is an interesting feature because this may do what's called phasing if these lows were to be a little bit stronger, but these aren't that impressive. Plus, the cold air is pretty far to the north at the high levels at this point, so this will be an inhibiting factor for that setup. So this is looking back towards this, or looking forward towards the 6th of February now, and we can see that for right now, things look like they're pretty calm. It's a pretty similar look on the Canadian model, too, by the way. We're going to set this one into a loop. The second seems like this next system that we'll have to watch here. We'll watch this sneak up from the Gulf here. Not even as stout as the Euro, by the way, but it still shows that something's there. This is a little bit stronger of a system on the 6th that we'll be watching as well. So those are the two dates that we'll be looking at to start out next month. But as of right now, I'm not super concerned about them. But notice that if you were to look back at the end of 2022 forecast, and I'll post a link in the top right corner so that way you can make your comparison if you so please, then you'll notice that this looks eerily identical. And then just right towards the middle of the month, especially once we showed the GFS, you're going to be like, okay, I see it. Because it'll start out being a relatively quiet month. Oh, boy, not again with this sounding thing. But it'll be identical in a way because really the start of the month is quiet. Maybe a storm system or two here and there. And then towards the middle of the month, things start to really go off here. So let's go ahead and shift it over to the GFS then. So here's the GFS here, and we're going to go ahead and set this into a loop. Again, a little bit stronger looking system on the Sunday outlook here. Then here is our next one here. This is going to be the system that's heading in around the 2nd. A little bit more stout, a little bit more energy to go along with it as well. So that's something to keep an eye on. And then the next system, it's a little bit stronger here towards the 5th and the 6th. Pretty stout looking, but I don't think there's going to be a lot of severe weather with it as of yet. We'll take a look and see what happens with that. But then look what happens as we get towards the 9th and the 10th timeline. Those are two pretty impressive systems right there. We're going to go back a little bit and actually pause it when this loop comes around again. But look again. We'll go one more time. Here's the 29th. This is the start of February right here. And then as we go towards the 2nd, the storm system starts to blossom. A lot of energy comes out ahead of it. It's a little bit of a warm sector here, so there is a good potential for severe weather. We'll have to see what the mid-levels end up doing with that. And then as time goes on, it's another big system. And then as we get towards the 7th to 9th time frame, that's when I'm going to pause it here. So here's a pretty strong, stout upper level low, and then we have this other trough that pops up here. So we could be seeing one of two things. We could either be seeing a trough ejection, or we could see these two systems interact or do what's called phasing here. These storm systems phase, that can become a much more dynamic system that would bring both potentially a winter storm and a severe weather threat, depending on its storm track and other variables. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. Then another massive cool down looks like it might be in place here for the western half of the U.S. How far to the south and east this goes is going to be a big question. But this is a pretty stout looking system as well. And I think this is one that definitely needs to be watched, even though we're 366 hours out. That's a very concerning look this far out. So we'll be having to watch towards the southern plains, maybe a little bit more so towards the Ozarks here and the Ohio Valley. I did see in the February outlook, I'll leave a link to that video as well, that this area is going to be a hot spot for storm systems from the looks of it. So we're going to have to watch this area with increased interest as time goes on, especially given the look of this system so far. And it looks like it goes right over that region. So that's something to look at. And last but not least, of course, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the precip models. All right, so we're back now with the precip maps, and we're going to go ahead and take a look at everything here. Just heading into the Sunday time frame. Like I said, not a lot of widespread shower and thunderstorm activity. Small chance that maybe one of these storms pops up severe, and then we'll watch this low come off and spread a little bit of that moisture across the southeast and some of the southeastern coast here. We'll see a little bit of snow on the far north side of this system, where we have just a little bit of cold air available and a small amount of moisture to work with here. It's going to be mainly an Adirondack and interior northeast type system. Otherwise, you'll be getting mostly rain. A little bit of freezing rain possible on the last day of January over towards the central plains. Maybe even a little bit of wintry precip for areas like Oklahoma City here. As we get towards the beginning of February here, we get a little pocket here that looks like we're getting some ice possibly. It's a little bit bold considering I think at the surface the temperature is going to be a bit too warm. But we'll have to see how that plays out. That's an interesting look and something to keep note of. So we get towards the second. Here's our next storm system here. Here's our next weather disturbance for the southern half of the U.S. here. Showers and thunderstorms possible. Maybe a marginal risk of severe weather right here. And that looks like it's going to be ongoing early in the day. Could be some increased activity later, but mainly it looks so far like it's going to be a rain threat. Maybe towards the backside of the system could be some severe, and it could stretch over on the third towards maybe southern Georgia, southern Alabama. Like I said, mainly the Gulf states look like they're going to be in play for this next severe event, if there's going to be one. Towards the second, I should say. And then as we get towards the 7th here, which is about the end of this model run, pretty stout looking system pops up here for the northwest here. This area is expected to get increased precip, and with the cold air in place, a lot of snow is possible, especially towards the mountain ranges, even towards some of the valleys. I would say snow is pretty much a high probability, almost a certainty for a good number of you guys. And then towards the northern plains, we have this shortwave system we're going to be watching too, and that's the end of this model run. Compared to the Canadian, it's not going to be too much different. The Euro and the Canadian have been in pretty good agreement for a bit here. So one thing to note, though, is the fact that the winter precip is set a little bit further south, which I do find interesting. But other than that small discrepancy, I think that's all that's really really different with this system. That rain snow line is a little bit further to the south. This is putting areas like Arkansas in play. But beyond that, not much going on that's too far out of the ordinary. And this also looks like these are pretty quick moving systems from the looks of it as well. So I don't think that these are going to be high total bearing events, so to speak. So let's go ahead and shift over to the GFS now, and this is where things are going to get interesting. Of course, the first 10 days, not too far from the Euro and the Canadian. So here's our first system, here's our second system. Rain snow line's a little bit further to the south, but I do think these temperatures are a tad bit too warm for that. I think it's mainly going to be a little bit further off towards this line between Kentucky and Tennessee. We'll see what that yields. Here's our system towards the second. A little bit more moisture to work with on this one. Then there's some severe potential here towards this region. No surprises there. Then as time goes on, that storm system leaves. Next one comes in. Ooh, that's interesting. It looks like we have an instance where we could see a little bit of a cold air damming setup right here towards the Appalachians, and there could be a welling of cold air that pools right here, leading to potentially a brief instance of snow and ice early on in the day around the Carolinas, but this is quickly going to move off. Then this becomes a little bit bigger of a snowstorm for the mid-Atlantic and Great Plains. Also has a lot of ice potential with this as well. And then there's like a little secondary pocket where we have that cold air meeting up with some of this moisture here and increasing snowfall across the Appalachians. Then this ends up going into the northeast, and then we start to see a big snow event for the interior, or at least towards the start of it. And then this will all end out as rain, and a lot of that snow that will have fallen will have melted, unfortunately, for anyone that is a snow fan, myself included. But I don't live in these areas anyway. I live here, so probably not going to be seeing anything. That being said, we move this to the 9th here, and we see our next big snowstorm potential right here up towards the northern plains. UP of Michigan in action again, of course. It's a little bit of rain further to the north this time too. It looks like parts of Minnesota are actually going to be getting a little bit of warmer air in this instance, which I find interesting. But as this system moves forth, could be some severe potential towards the southeast. Definitely looks like there's good flood potential with this as well, so we'll be keeping an extra close eye on that. As we get towards the 12th, another big system. This one is going to be the one that's oriented more so towards the Ohio Valley, which we'll be keeping a close eye on. Seems to have a little bit more of a damaging wind type look, but we'll have to see how things progress given how far out it is. But so far, it seems like maybe some potential towards the beginning of the month for a big storm. Likelihood isn't high as of right now, but of course, we all know how quickly that can change. And then as time goes on, activity picks back up. And then we especially also have to watch this region over here again, because it looks like that atmospheric river may come back into play. Let's hope that's not the case, but it looks like I see a pretty big cyclone that'll be spinning off the West Coast before Valentine's Day. So we'll be keeping a close eye on that. So if you have plans around that time, just make sure you're watching the weather. But that's the end of this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, drop me a like. If you haven't already, of course, do the double click where you like and subscribe. Share this video for anyone that's wanting to get ahead of the ball, so to speak, especially if they're a weather fan. But beyond that, of course, this has been Tyler Metalhead Weatherman. I'll see you guys in the next video. You guys take care, and I'll see you soon.